Welcome back to The Deep Dive. Today, we're plunging into a subject everyone seems to agree on: justice. At least superficially.
Right. But as soon as you scratch the surface, especially when you add that word social in front of justice, well, the agreement kind of vanishes.
Yeah, it becomes, as Thomas Sowell puts it, only a seeming agreement, because we haven't really examined what we mean by justice, what these competing ideas are.
And that's really the core of Sowell's work we're looking at today, his book, The Quest for Cosmic Justice. He basically forces you to define fairness.
Because he argues there are these two profoundly different, even incompatible moral visions pulling society apart.
Exactly. So our mission today is to really unpack that conflict he outlines.
Okay, so on one side we have what he calls traditional justice. What's that about?
That's the one focused narrowly on process, impartial process. Fair rules apply the same to everyone.
And the other side?
That's cosmic justice. And this one is all about the outcome. It wants to correct every disadvantage, achieve equality of result, fix undeserved misfortune.
Undeserved misfortune from anywhere, like not just what people do to each other.
From anywhere. Society, genetics, just bad luck. The cosmos itself, you could say. That's why he uses the term cosmic.
Wow, okay. And so the Well sees this as more than just, a political debate.
Oh, absolutely. It's way deeper than economics or policy for him. It's a fundamental moral warning.
A warning about what?
About what happens when our natural compassion, which is a good thing, gets separated from thinking about the actual consequences of trying to engineer fairness.
And what happens when the state gets the power to be this cosmic scorekeeper, adjusting life's results?
Well, the warning is stark. He argues good intentions, if they're not checked by reality, and frankly, humility, don't just fail. They can actually become coercive.
So the search for perfect fairness could end up undermining liberty and the rule of law.
That's precisely his argument. So let's dig into how he builds that case, starting with these two competing ideas of justice.
All right, let's start with a familiar one. Traditional justice. What does that look like in practice?
Well, think of the classic image of justice. Lady Justice, blindfolded, holding the scales.
The blindfold is key, right? Meaning you don't look at who the person is, their status, or what outcome you want.
Exactly. Justice isn't measured by the result, but by the fairness of the process. Did the trial follow the rules? Was the judge impartial?
So whether someone is acquitted or convicted, if the process was fair according to known rules, then justice was done in this traditional sense.
Right. It's focused on individual actions. Did this person break this specific known law?
It sounds like ensuring a fair fight, not guaranteeing everyone wins.
That's a good analogy. Or a level playing field. Everyone plays by the same rules, judged by the same standards.
Like in baseball, you apply the same rules, and Mark McGwire hits 70 home runs, someone else hits 5. That inequality of outcome isn't seen as unjust.
Not in the traditional view, no, because the process was fair. The idea is you had your chance. The rules were the same for everyone.
So traditional justice looks backward, in a way, at what people actually did.
Yes. It deals with resolving conflicts or punishing actions between specific people based on established rules. Person A harms person B. The process addresses that.
Okay, so how does cosmic justice differ? It sounds much broader.
It is. It's not just about resolving specific human conflicts. The goal is bigger: to correct undeserved inequalities, to fix all misfortunes.
Even stuff that's just bad luck, or genetics, or a tough environment.
Yes. Stuff arising from the cosmos, not just human action. And Sowell points to philosophers like John Rawls here.
Rawls argued that undeserved inequalities call for redress, right, to get beyond just formal equality.
Exactly. Rawls wanted genuine equality of opportunity, or fair equality of opportunity, which means more than just having the same rules on paper.
So, back to the race analogy. Formal equality is everyone runs on the same track.
Right. But cosmic justice says, hang on. Some runners started way behind, maybe due to historical disadvantages or just being born less athletic. Just saying go compete isn't truly fair if the outcome is already skewed.
So to make it fair in this cosmic sense, what has to happen?
This is the crucial point Sowell makes. To get equal prospects or equal results, you have to start applying unequal rules and standards deliberately.
Unequal rules? How so?
You might need to bend or set aside certain rules to compensate for those initial disadvantages. Maybe different admission standards, different requirements.
Like the example in the sources about Stanford dropping achievement tests.
Precisely. The reasoning was that requiring them could unfairly penalized disadvantaged students who went to weaker high schools through no fault of their own.
Through no fault of their own. That phrase seems central.
It's the engine driving the quest for cosmic justice. But here's the immediate problem Sowell flags. This requires immense power.
Power for whom?
For third parties. Government officials, judges, intellectuals. Someone has to have the authority to override the existing rules, to override individual choices, to control the outcomes.
That sounds very different from traditional justice, which seems more decentralized.
It is. And this power comes with costs. Costs that Sowell argues are often completely ignored by those demanding the equal outcome.
He even calls it antisocial justice sometimes.
He does. Because focusing intensely on fixing one group's perceived injustice can impose huge costs on other innocent people or society as a whole.
Okay, let's make that concrete. Talk about that San Francisco pizza delivery story he uses.
Right. So mid-90s, a city supervisor is outraged because a relative can't get pizza delivered in a high-crime neighborhood.
Sees it as an injustice. These residents are being penalized just for where they live through no fault of their own.
Exactly. So the legislative fix, a new law saying if a company delivers anywhere in the city, it must deliver everywhere, period.
So the residents get their pizza, problem solved, equal outcome achieved.
On the surface, yes. But Sowell asks, what about the cost? What about the delivery drivers? Mostly young, often low-wage workers.
Their risk of being robbed, assaulted, even killed goes way up in those areas.
Significantly higher. The law basically forced these innocent drivers to take on that increased personal risk to solve the inequality for the residents.
So the cost of fixing one unfairness was imposing a new, potentially lethal risk on another group of innocent people.
That's the core of the trade-off. Cosmic justice often demands, according to Sowell. You can't just declare, let there be equality, without considering the human cost. The law ignored the drivers.
It forces the question, is it really justice to solve an economic problem like high-risk making delivery unprofitable by forcing the burden onto someone else who had nothing to do with it?
Sowell's answer is clearly no. He'd say it's just moving the injustice around from an abstract category, residents denied pizza, to specific individuals, drivers facing danger. And it does so through coercion.
Okay, so if that's the philosophical clash, what happens when cosmic justice principles start getting applied? Sowell argues it leads to undermining the rule of law.
Yes, because the two are fundamentally at odds. Traditional justice needs predictable rules known in advance, applied equally.
While cosmic justice needs flexibility to adjust things after the fact based on the outcome.
Exactly. It needs retrospective adjustment, and you can't have both predictability and constant retrospective tinkering based on who wins or loses.
Why is that predictability so crucial for the rule of law?
Because freedom depends on knowing what the rules are before you act. If the rules can be changed after the fact to achieve a certain result, you can never be sure if you're complying. Your actions become unpredictable in their legal consequences.
And Sowell sees this playing out in the courts, with judges changing their role.
He argues they shift from being neutral referees applying existing rules to becoming agents of change or representatives on mission. They start imposing their own moral vision or an elite vision instead of the law.
So less like an umpire calling balls and strikes based on the rule book.
And more like someone trying to make sure the final score fits their idea of what's fair, even if it means changing the strike zone mid-game.
This sounds like moving away from the old idea that judges should decide as few things as possible, letting the law speak for itself.
Very much so. He contrasts it with the Aristotelian ideal. The agent of change judge mirrors more the revolutionary spirit, like in the French Revolution, where judges were meant to enact the general will for utopian ends, not just apply existing law.
And this leads to a problem with vagueness in the law.
It has to. If your goal is a specific outcome, like fair representation or reduced inequality, which are complex and shifting targets, you can't write precise rules in advance to guarantee that outcome.
So the laws have to be vague to give judges or bureaucrats the wiggle room they need.
Precisely. Think about terms like reasonable accommodation for disabilities or banning actions that substantially lessen competition. What do those actually mean in practice?
Nobody knows for sure until a court rules on it, maybe years later.
Right. An employer makes an accommodation they think is reasonable. Years later, a court says, nope, not reasonable enough. They broke a law they couldn't have known they were breaking at the time.
So Quoll calls this being hit by a bolt from the blue. It creates massive legal uncertainty.
And fear of arbitrary power. That's exactly what constitutional principles like the ban on ex post facto laws were designed to prevent. When law aims for utopian outcomes, liberty shrinks because action becomes unpredictable.
This pursuit also impacts basic ideas of moral responsibility, especially in criminal justice.
Yes, this is a major shift. Sowell documents, particularly since the 1960s. The focus shifts towards mitigating factors often tied to the criminal's background or social disadvantage.
Like considering a murderer's unhappy childhood during sentencing?
Even when that childhood has absolutely no connection to the specific crime or victim. He cites that California case where the victim was a 12-year-old girl.
And the murderer's childhood suffering decades earlier was brought in as a mitigating factor, even though the victim had nothing to do with it.
Exactly. It's as if the court is trying to correct the injustice done by the universe to the murderer, rather than focusing on the injustice the murderer did to the victim. The cosmos is on trial, not just the criminal act.
What are the consequences of that shift?
Well, first, Sowell argues it undermines deterrence. If punishment is softened or excused because of background factors, it weakens the signal that crime has severe consequences.
Which could lead to more crime, harming more innocent people.
Right. And second, the practical consequences for the justice system itself. It becomes incredibly complex and slow.
How so?
Prosecutors now have to spend time rebutting psychological speculation. How do you disprove someone had an unhappy childhood decades ago? It bogs everything down.
Leading to delays, backlogs.
Which means dangerous criminals might be out on bail longer, potentially committing more crimes while awaiting trial. Justice delayed, especially for victims, is often justice denied. This delay is a huge cost of pursuing cosmic justice in the courts.
Okay, so it affects the rule of law, moral responsibility. What about incentives? Does this quest erode incentives?
Sowell argues forcefully that it does, because the underlying logic is about fixing pre-existing inequalities that exist through no fault of their own.
But wait, isn't there an argument that not adjusting for those inequalities just locks them in place forever? What about things like affirmative action as a way to level the field?
He definitely addresses that argument. He acknowledges the good intentions trying to create fairness. But he argues the practical results are often counterproductive and harm third parties.
Like the Stanford example again, setting aside test scores to help disadvantaged students.
Yes. While it seems compassionate, he points to a cascade of negative consequences. First, you disregard the interests of those funding the university taxpayers, donors.
Their goal is usually to maximize the educational return on investment, right? To produce the most skilled graduates for society's benefit.
Right. If you lower standards to achieve a demographic target, you potentially reduce the overall quality and productivity of that resource for everyone.
And what about the effect on the students who benefit from these adjusted standards?
This is where Sowell sees a serious problem. It can create a sense of entitlement and reduce the perceived need for effort.
He cited studies about Black students feeling less urgency to prepare for grad school.
Yes, because they believed certain rules would simply be set aside for them. Or Nigerian students who excel on merit, sometimes relying on preferences when available.
So, if you believe your lack of preparation will be compensated for by the system,
the motivation to put in the hard work, to acquire the skills, what economists call human capital, is weakened. It fosters a belief that effort isn't the primary factor for success.
And he argues this can ultimately hold back the very groups the policies are intended to help.
Yes, and it can even create perverse social pressures within those groups.
Like the acting white accusation against Black students who do focus on academics.
Yeah, exactly. That dynamic, he argues, makes a kind of tragic sense if you truly believe the system is rigged against you, the cosmic few. If the system guarantees failure, why try? And if the system guarantees compensation for lack of effort, why try? Either way, the incentive to strive is diminished.
Now, another major pillar of Sowell's critique seems to be how statistics are used or misused in this debate. He talks about statistical mirages, especially around income inequality.
Absolutely. We hear constantly about the bottom 20% or the poor, as if this is a fixed group of people stuck there forever.
But Sowell says that's an illusion, created by looking at snapshots in time.
Yes. It treats a statistical category, the lowest income quintile, at a particular moment, as if it's a permanent social class made up of the same individuals year after year. The data on actual people over time tells a very different story.
What does that data show about income mobility?
It shows tremendous movement. Most Americans don't stay in the same income bracket for very long. The idea of being born poor and dying poor is not the reality for the vast majority.
He cites specific numbers, right? Like only 3% staying in the bottom 20% for 8 years.
That's right. And incredibly, more people who started in the bottom 20% ended up in the top 20% during that period than remained stuck at the bottom.
Wow. So the category the poor is constantly changing membership.
Highly transient, which helps explain some seeming paradoxes.
Like what?
Like the fact that people statistically defined as poor often spend far more than their reported income. Or that many own cars, even homes.
Things that don't fit the image of long-term destitution.
Exactly. It fits the picture of people having a temporary rough patch or being at a particular life stage, maybe students, retirees drawing savings, people between jobs who know their low income isn't permanent.
And age is a huge factor here too, isn't it?
Probably the single biggest factor explaining income differences, according to Sowell. People naturally earn more as they gain experience and advance in their careers. Older families have more assets.
So comparing a 25-year-old to a 55-year-old isn't comparing apples to apples in terms of social standing. It's mostly just life cycle.
Right. It's not necessarily evidence of some deep societal injustice demanding cosmic intervention. Once you account for age and maybe hours worked, family size, a lot of the dramatic inequality narrative softens.
He estimates the genuinely, persistently rich or poor is a much smaller percentage.
Less than 7%, he figures. Yet the political discourse often remains fixated on these large, abstract 20% categories, fueling the demand for intervention.
This ties into another concept Sowell tackles: merit. Trying to reward people based on merit sounds good, but he says it's impossible.
Yeah, he calls the idea of rewarding merit seductive, but ultimately unworkable. Because who can possibly judge true net merit?
How do you weigh talent versus effort? Good luck versus bad luck? A supportive family versus hardship? It's an impossible calculation.
Totally impossible for any human to figure out accurately. So what does society actually reward? Not merit, but productivity.
Productivity, meaning what you actually produce, the value you create for others.
Exactly. It's measurable. Yeah, output, sales, problem solved. That's what gets rewarded in a market system.
So my spending hours making a terrible cake gets less reward than a skilled baker making a great one quickly, even if I tried harder.
Precisely. Because the market values the result, the productivity. And this focus on productivity provides the necessary prospective incentives. It tells people what skills and efforts are valued going forward.
Whereas trying to judge merit is looking backward. And it's subjective.
Yes. And if you try to intervene to reward effort or perceived merit instead of output, Sowell argues you mess up those future incentives. Overall productivity likely falls.
And that makes society poorer overall, hurting millions of people indirectly.
That's the danger. The quest for cosmic justice, by trying to correct past or inherent unfairness in rewards, can stifle the creation of wealth that benefits everyone. It assumes a fixed pie to be redistributed, but the intervention itself might shrink the pie.
And this connects to the role of envy.
Yes. Sowell argues that envy, historically seen as a vice, gets repackaged as a virtue social justice in this framework. Prosperity is framed not as productivity, but as exploitation or greed.
And that framing has costs.
Huge costs. It can discourage less fortunate groups from learning from or associating with more prosperous ones. If success is seen as suspect, why adopt successful habits?
It can even lead to successful members of a group being ostracized as sellouts or traitors.
Right? Which cuts people off from valuable knowledge and role models within their own communities. It's self-destructive.
And this leads to what he calls the dog in the manger principle, based on Rawls.
Yeah, the idea derived from Rawls' difference principle is that you should reject any policy, even if it makes almost everyone better off, if it doesn't also improve the condition of the absolute poorest group.
That sounds like giving a veto to the very bottom, regardless of overall progress.
It essentially does.
Yeah.
Like the dog in the fable that won't eat the hay but prevents the horse from eating it either.
So if a policy massively benefits 95% of people but leaves the bottom 5% unchanged, or maybe improves them less, cosmic justice might say reject it.
Yes, because it increases the gap, even if everyone is materially better off. It prioritizes reducing relative inequality over absolute improvement, potentially leading to stagnation.
Okay, so this all seems to be building towards a fundamental conflict between the quest for cosmic justice and individual liberty, especially property rights.
Exactly. Property rights are often the first casualty because property owners are painted as privileged. But Sowell argues property rights are crucial for everyone, not just the rich.
How so? Like free speech benefits everyone, not just writers.
Right. Property rights provide the security and incentive needed for investment, innovation, and efficient use of resources. That benefits consumers, workers, everyone, through lower prices and more opportunities. If you're not sure you can keep the fruits of your labor or investment,
You're less likely to labor or invest in the first place.
Precisely. We see this historically. He points to things like the abolition of private land in Eastern Europe, leading to food shortages, despite fertile land, or rent control leading to housing shortages. Restricting property rights has real-world consequences in terms of scarcity.
And it forces difficult moral trade-offs, often on the poor themselves, like that housing reform example.
Yes, the 19th century reformers who wanted to ban substandard immigrant housing. They were well-intentioned, appalled by the conditions.
From their middle-class perspective, it looked like an injustice people were forced into.
But for many immigrants, living in cheap, crowded housing was a conscious choice. It was the only way they could save money to send home, bring family over, or invest in their children's future. It was their optimal trade-off, given their priorities.
So the reformers, by banning the cheap housing, took away that option.
Yes. They forced the immigrants into more expensive housing, leaving them with less money for their priorities: food, family, savings. The reformers imposed their preferred trade-off on the poor.
It's a kind of paternalism disguised as justice, deciding what's best for others, even against their own choices.
That's exactly how Sowell frames it. A quiet repeal of the poor's right to make their own choices with their own limited resources, all to satisfy the moral sensibilities of outside observers.
And the mechanism for imposing these kinds of changes usually involves a massive expansion of government power.
It has to. Achieving cosmic justice re-engineering society to fit a specific pattern of outcomes requires enormous, concentrated political power. Power to override local decisions, individual choices, and market outcomes.
This runs directly counter to the American constitutional design of limited government.
Completely hostile to it. So Powell specifically points to the erosion of the 10th Amendment, the idea that powers not given to the federal government belong to the states or the people.
How has that been eroded? He talks about a quiet repeal.
Often through federal funding. The government uses tax money aid as leverage. It attaches conditions to that money that it couldn't constitutionally impose directly.
Like telling states how to run their schools or hospitals if they want federal dollars.
Exactly. Mandating curricula, hiring practices, specific policies. States and institutions become dependent on the money and feel forced to comply, even if the mandates don't make sense locally. Local control is effectively bought off.
So decisions get centralized, removed from people on the ground who might know better.
Yes, policies get driven by a top-down, often untested moral vision rather than local needs and knowledge. The Constitution was about setting up processes to limit power, not guaranteeing specific outcomes.
So when judges focus on, is this outcome fair, rather than was the legal process followed, they're acting outside that constitutional framework.
So argues they're acting more like those representatives on mission for the French Revolution, prioritizing their vision of fairness over the constraints of law. And judge-made law, changing the rules after the fact, is essentially ex post facto law, a hallmark of tyranny.
So boiling it down, cosmic justice and freedom under law are incompatible.
That's his stark conclusion. Traditional justice, with its focus on impersonal, known-in-advance rules, can be mass-produced. It protects liberty.
Whereas cosmic justice
Has to be handmade. It requires powerful individuals imposing their decisions, their vision, forcing people into abstract categories to achieve a desired pattern.
And this reduces everyone, beneficiaries and victims alike, too.
Supplicants of those who hold this power. It fosters dependency and undermines personal responsibility and freedom.
Okay, so we've really unpacked this deep dichotomy Sowell presents. Traditional justice, aiming to preserve liberty through limited power and process,
versus cosmic justice, which, in its ambition to fix every inequality, ends up demanding huge amounts of power and, he argues, destroying liberty. The tyranny of visions, as he might say.
He has that great fable analogy at the end, right? The dog with the bone.
Yes. The dog sees its reflection in the water, thinks the reflected bone looks bigger and better. It drops its real, attainable bone to grasp at the illusion and loses everything.
Cosmic justice is the illusory bone.
That's the warning. In chasing this perfect, unattainable fairness, we risk losing the actual imperfect liberty we can have under the rule of law. trading freedom for coercion.
He ties this back to the American founding, doesn't he? The triumph of the common man, a society without a ruling aristocracy.
Right, built by ordinary people. But now, he sees a new class of elites, self-appointed moral guardians, with towering presumptions about their right to re-engineer society.
Which leads to the final provocative thought for you, the listener. Sowell suggests the American Revolution wasn't about perfecting society, but restraining power.
So the question becomes, does preserving liberty today depend less on trying to iron out every single inequality life throws at us, and more on having the humility to accept life's inherent imperfections in order to keep power restrained, especially when so many equate morality with giving the state more power to fix things?
A challenging thought to end on. Well, that's about all the time we have. You've been listening to The Deep Dive from Wake Up and Smell the Freedom, where ideas percolate. Thanks for joining us as we continue to explore the ideas that shape liberty and continue to shape us today. Remember, the pursuit of liberty begins with understanding, and understanding begins with asking the right questions. Until next time.
Bye-bye.